All right. Well, good morning. Good morning for you if you're in the United States. For some other people, it's mid-afternoon at this point. So, how are you? What questions do you have for me? I don't really have a monologue. I have a few comments out here to address if you want to begin with your questions. Again, I think the thing that has worked best for me is I just answer the most recent question that's there. So cut and paste, and you're not annoying in my uh, chat if you say it multiple times. It's just I didn't see it before, and I'm not trying to ignore you or whatever. So I'll try to answer things. Okay, so it's been an interesting week as I'm sure that the people that are here, Ozzy and Cheryl and the big cat, and I mean, I recognize a lot of these names. I'm sure you're all paying a lot of attention. Since you are paying such close attention, what's on your mind? What's foremost in your mind? Is it politics? Is it weapons deliveries? Is it drone strikes like the oil refineries, or what is it that you would like to talk about? In the meantime, I only have 6 comments from this because it got crowded out by other things on my community tab. Like there was another impersonator, and so I put out a note about that and that kind of thing. Um, I will address this one. Taylor Swift or Putin's inner circle, who are they? I have no idea anything related to Taylor Swift. This is not going to be something that I can uh, answer with it. I'm not sure that I could identify a song by Taylor Swift. That's how lame I am. I spend my time reading, not immersed in that kind of pop culture. So I apologize for that. Um, okay, so unless you have questions, let's see. American democracy restoring a Okay, the big cat says American democracy and restoring our democratic institutions is our main concern. The democratic institutions are working like they're supposed to work. The issue is the politics, not the institutions. The institutions are fine, but the politics are very, very um, angry. Very. I was watching something where a commentator was talking about Trump, and it's not even so much his politics as a matter of his style that is attracting people to him. And I wonder if that's not accurate. I wonder if there's something to that. Um, but the politics itself is, I think, the driver of the problem, not the institutions. The institutions are working exactly like they're designed to work. Okay. Doug1445 says, should we? Oh, by the way, if you put at Professor Gerdes explains, like I changed it from Dr. Gerdes because I was like, nobody was actually getting it to Professor Dash Gerdes. If you just put at Professor Gerdes, it goes to my other channel, the one that I was on before this, just talking about leadership kind of stuff before the war broke. But if you put Professor Dash Gerdes, it will come to me. Okay, should we take into account uh, the contributing factor of the Treaty of Versailles to the rise of Hitler and World War II when considering compensation by Russia? Yes, because you're going to have, while Russia ought to be paying, grinding them into the ground is not the way to go about doing it. I think you have a model after World War II where Germany and Japan were held to account, but they weren't. They were brought up easy, right? Like, yes, you're on the mat now. Let's revive you. But they were revived without, like in Japan, without the Bushido culture, without the loyalty to the emperor. And they were revived in such a way that their auto industry was, and even electronics a little bit later, were just giving us a hard time with our economy because they were rebuilding so well. So that's more of a model, but they still need to pay reparations, and doing it on the front end by stealing from frozen assets will destroy faith in the economic financial system, in my estimation. And I think that's a poor idea. And you would think that's a poor idea too if you didn't want the money. I mean, if you're honest with yourself, if it wasn't for that, like you. if you are behind a Rawlsian veil of ignorance, this means that you don't know anything that is, you don't know where you stand in this picture. You would say, yeah, don't steal the money from people like the oligarchs who may or may not have anything to do with what was going on. Now they probably do. I mean, they're oligarchs, but like if you don't know that, it's not, you're penalizing them for what really should be penalized by the Russian government, or you should bill it to the account of the Russian government, not the individuals whose assets are frozen, and you will destroy good faith and credit in the financial system. So don't do that. However, there was a clever move of looking at taking the interest, which is, it's still doing that, but it's a whole lot less bad than doing what they're proposing to do. And I feel like I'm crooked on here somehow. I don't know how to fix that. There's something odd going on here. Give me a second. Let me see. That looks a little straighter, doesn't it? Okay. All right. So, all right. Cheryl's now here. Trump's style is an excuse people use to ignore his behavior. It might be, but I think there's something. What I mean by the style, I mean the combativeness. I think people just they want that. I mean, what they really need is somebody more conciliatory for the country to heal, and what we are, I'm afraid, are going to get are something much worse. So okay. Um, let's see. Paul Good Deburits. I'm sorry if I'm slaughtering that. Why do you argue that we should not use Russian state? Oh, I just explained that. Jumpy says, Professor Gerdes, at least your eyebrows don't look as big as Greg's did last night. Yeah. Okay. In his defense, he's sitting in some bad bunker, or I mean, just think about where he is. I'm home. I just rolled out of bed, and I'm in my own warm, comfortable, cozy conditions, and he doesn't necessarily have that. But yeah, he was looking pretty rough last night, right? Um, okay. Let's see. I can't even. Giulio Tamu. Wow. Question about Donald. This doesn't have to be the Donald Trump show. Let's talk about Ukraine. I'll answer this, but Donald Trump's recent comment at a campaign rally said the U.S. gave Ukraine 200 billion, while the EU only gave 20 billion. How inaccurate is that? It's highly inaccurate. But to his greater point, the U.S. has okay. So when Trump was president, the EU, not the EU, but NATO was really not pulling their weight, and all the threats of, oh, we're not going to do this, this is a bad deal for us, have really inadvertently caused NATO to prepare. It's not what Trump meant. It's not what Trump was trying to accomplish, I don't think, but it accidentally helped them, which is a really wild thing to think. Okay. Cheryl says, my relatives say Harley is boring. Trump fun and exciting, or Haley is boring. Trump is fun and exciting. They get a dopamine rush off seeing how much they can get away. Yeah, again, there's something about his style that people find attractive, more than his policy necessarily. Now, people are lining up behind him because they think that he's the presumptive winner, and there's lots of academic studies that show that people support winners just because it appears like they're winning, and so he's got that working in his favor. So both things. Zombie, I wrote my senator after your videos about it. He actually wrote back, and I was shocked. No, they will write back, right? Yeah, so that's good. One, thank you for doing that. If you wrote your senator or congressman, would you just put that in the chat? I'm just curious how many of you. There's 30. No, that's likes. There's 132 people in the chat. I'm just curious how many people have actually written their congressman or senator. And I put out a video about how to do it, and not a lot of people watched it, but this was like really important. Like, and this is the time right now to keep writing them. And if you, again, you don't have to worry about convincing them of anything. You have to worry about getting your tally that another person supports Ukraine, another person supports Ukraine, another person, and that's what they're really looking at more than being persuaded by your argument. Some staffer there will be tallying this. It's not like it's going to convince him. Like if it's a really awesome letter, maybe it'll go to the congressman. But if not, a staffer will look at it, say, yes, another person supports Ukraine, and here's form letter C to answer your question or whatever it is. Okay. Who else is talking to me, or are you cross talking here? I think whenever Trump says something, people should ask what would happen if Barack Obama said it. Yeah, okay, the big cat. That's a great a great question or a statement. That's what I mean by the between but behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance. Uh, Take this with all political questions or issues. If you heard that this happened and you didn't have the context of it's your guy or the other guy, would you support that thing? And when you filter it that way, you start going, maybe that shouldn't be supported, or this is a better idea or worse idea or whatever. Okay, let's talk about Ukraine rather than Trump. Again, even here, Trump's taking up all the air. He's taking out all the oxygen out of the room. What questions can I answer for you about Ukraine? One of the questions that was in the chat was talking about Zaluzhny and looking at his popularity outside Ukraine. We underestimate the importance of Zaluzhny. Could he be more popular with the soldiers than Zelensky? I expect you can cover all different types of leaders, doers, communicators, strategists, what are necessary qualities. And so I'll answer that if you don't have other questions here, but something just popped up, and maybe I'll go back to that in a little bit. Michael Nackey said in his daily report today that most of his peers haven't actually read Zaluzhny's articles from months back, so he's thinking about narrating his new article. Okay. I don't know. I read it. I mean, it was a good article. And I think Zaluzhny was honest about without additional weapons, we can't actually do more than we're doing, which is why they're doing the drone strikes, the seaborne strikes, the oil refinery strike this morning, the all kinds of things were happening asymmetrically rather than across the lines. And um, you could almost see it's like looking at a car accident. You could almost see, like, with the withdrawal from Kherson, that bad things were going to happen. They allowed the entire army from Kherson pretty much to leave, untouched, and that army is now on the front lines, dug in with dragon's teeth and minefields, and you could see that the counteroffensive was gonna have a hard time as a consequence of that because they didn't have the time or the resources to really punch through like they needed to. Anyway, what do you think is the root dispute between Zelensky and Zaluzhny? That's a good question. Um, so I don't think it's just political. Some people will say, well, he's more popular than Zelensky, and so it's political. He could run for president. I think there's more than that. Um, I think okay, so this is true everywhere. This is true with Truman and MacArthur in the 1950s with Korea. So Zelensky outranks him. He wins. I mean, that's the nature of it. But I don't think Zelensky is that petty that he just. But when Zaluzhny did that article with the stalemate language in it, I think it really got under. Or Zaluzhny did the article with the stalemate language in it. I think it got under Zelensky's skin because he had to undo that. Remember, Zelensky's also having a bad time with his own Time magazine piece coming out, the kind of hit job on Zelensky. By the way, that guy's book is coming out. That's going to be terrible. Um, Okay, and then so he's having to unwind the narrative that it's a stalemate, which is a really hard thing. Like as if life's not hard enough for Zelensky, he's got to unwind that narrative, and then you see it again with the number of troops that Zaluzhny is saying publicly we need to have. So I think, I mean, I don't know how it is in all other countries, but at least in the United States, serve active duty military officers shut up about politics, and that's a good idea because they're not making public statements about it, so they're not undermining in any way. I don't know that Zaluzhny was intentionally undermining. He could have been. I don't know, but Zaluzhny was. Um, definitely creating a problem for Zelensky when he's saying we need 500,000 new troops, and Zelensky saying no, 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 we don't need 500,000. Like he's trying to be measured or trying to think about how to do it, and they're working the bill through the RADA right now to get all the pieces of that sorted out. And um, yeah, I just yeah, okay. Somebody else said something about while I was looking at this. Love the bite-size updates, and thank you so much. You're a star. I'm glad you like them. I everything I'm doing is trying to help you understand what's going on as efficiently as possible. And so one day accidentally, I think it was I remember specifically it was a Tuesday. I don't know why it jumped it hit me then, but I said, hey, would three big stories help, and would you be interested in watching that kind of thing, like if I just focused on that? And then I did that, and then while I was doing three big stories, every day was like, man, this was a great story, that was a great story, this was but I had to really prioritize the three great stories, but I left a lot of context on the table, and that's what caused me to go, what if there was a first thing in the morning that was just talking about these stories to give the rest of the context, and then the three big stories to keep you focused? Because three big, I'm looking at long term, here's what's important, like the real big kind of pictures, not just that, something went boom that day. That's important, but like what just happened with Orban and the European Union and the 50 billion euro deal that they got through, that's important, especially long term. That's not the same as something that explodes that day. That's really interesting because, hey, another oil refinery just went up like it did this morning. Okay. Let's see. Eh, Okay, you're not talking to me here. Live shows are very early for West Coast, maybe a bit later. So I'm trying to work around a couple of things. I'm trying to like make it for both the Europeans and for, well, I mean, my own family's obligations with things. So I'm trying to do this on here so that, I'm going to the library and then to a basketball game with my kids later on, and then watching my other son's basketball game. So like life is still going on. I I don't have a lot of wiggle room in life. Like I missed the drone strike I put on my community. Hey, watch Dennis, because I was dealing with students, and then I had to run the class, and I just didn't have time to put that together. So that's how that works out. At Professor Gerdes, I watch Johnny for my big updates, but your bite-sized pieces are both wait are something, can't remember what that is, are both short and sweet and informative. Yeah, and so that's what. Yeah, and if you want, please go watch others. I mean, it's like the beauty of this is that there's not like if you watch me, you can't watch somebody else too, or if vice versa. That's great. And so the bite size kind of gives you a little bit of a framework of what's going on, and then you understand what else is going on more effectively, hopefully, as you watch more and more. But at any rate, to answer your question about the when I do the live stream, I fully recognize this is not the optimal time. I think if you're North American, Mercado has a better time slot, right? An evening, people are watching, kicking back, relaxing after dinner, and but I'm not trying to compete with that. I'm just trying to fit it in where I can answer questions within my own, like, how life works. Okay, what other questions do we have here? I don't see questions at me. Zaluzhny is written. Okay, we already talked about that. Is it possible if something else is gone? I don't know if you're talking to me. Okay, so we talked about Zaluzhny and Zelensky, and let's talk about the leadership style until somebody else pops up with something. Um, Cheryl just popped up again with something about Trump. Okay, I'll finish this with Trump, and then we'll go back to Ukraine. I would have questioned. I never would have questioned the vaccines if Bush had introduced them. So again, okay, I'm going to divert for a little bit, but it was just the most bizarre behavior that people are pro-vaccine when it's a Republican, and then anti-vaccine if you're a Democrat when the Republican's in office, and then anti-vaccine if you're a Republican, and then pro-vaccine when the Democrat's in office. The vaccine itself, like, should not change because of your political position, but It's bizarre how people act. We're not as rational as we like to think that we are. Okay, let's get back to other issues with Ukraine here. Do you have any thought on the Kremlin proposed presidential candidate who started saying that he hopes he doesn't fall out of a window, openly opposes Putin and the war? Okay, so we talked about this in the three big stories last night. So I can't pronounce his name, Nadvieds or something. You know who I'm talking about. So the election committee has found irregularities with it, and the election committee says that there are dead people on the list. Well, how recently dead they are or whatever, but they're concerned about the ethics of somebody who would collect the signatures of dead people. So they cloak themselves in this garb of legality in order to do illegal things like knock him out of contention. Um, I think I mean, like if he does get knocked out of contention, he dodges a bullet, and I mean that in a almost literal kind of sense. Just like the I'm trying to remember the lady that was a journalist, her name, uh, but she dodged a bullet. The person that's going to do fine and pick up maybe 10% of the vote will be the Communist Party candidate who has picked up upwards of 15%, I think, once in a previous election, but that's because he's no real threat to Putin, and his big issue is collective farming. We need to do more collective farming like they did in the 1930s because that was a good idea. So, but if you're actually a real threat to Putin, I don't think it'll work well for you. Okay, Professor Gerdes, I wrote my North Carolina representative and got an unhinged response about how Biden's weakness is what caused Russia to invade. Was wondering if you could help me form a response. Don't worry about a response. Yeah. So again, you won't believe me when I tell you what Republicans think. I'm not telling you that they're right. I'm telling you understand how they think. It feels right to me too when he kind of what he was saying. I mean, I get it. Like the weakness that we saw, that we demonstrated in like the way that we left Afghanistan. Now I know the full story. Like Trump started the architecture for leaving Afghanistan, but the way that it rolled out, people falling off the planes as they're trying to get out and scrambling, and now look what the Taliban has done since then. Like we didn't know that the Taliban was going to do what the Taliban is doing. Sure, I get all that, but Republicans just feel like because we demonstrated weakness, this egged Putin on to do what he was doing. Now, would he have done it anyway? Possibly, we don't know. And would he have done it under Trump? We don't know. We can't know. But Republicans tend to think this wouldn't have happened if Trump was still in office. It's kind of like the vaccine thing. And I don't know that you can dislodge that. There's even a part of me that feels like it just something might have gone differently. I can't prove it, but right. So that's how they feel. Now, if that's how they perceive the world, you can't say they don't really perceive that. You can say it's wrong, but you're not going to convince them of that, just like they're not going to convince you of something else, right? So, but I wouldn't argue with the congressman. The best thing that you can do is organize as many people within that district as possible. Send anybody who's willing. That video that I have about how to write your congressman with the samples, like send as many as are willing to listen to that and ask them, would you please? Now if you get a commitment from somebody, right, this commitment device is something that a used car salesman will use, and I'm not telling you to be a used car salesman, but like they say, so you said you're interested in this, and if we have this car, you're going to buy it today, right? Okay, once you say right, now you've committed to this. Same thing, a commitment device. When I tell you, and I know what I'm doing, when I tell you, look, when the primary comes around, I'm voting for Haley. I am. And that's a commitment device. And I feel like morally obligated because I said that publicly. Get as many people as are willing, that are already interested, to commit to writing a letter, and then tell them, okay, now I'm going to follow up and see if you wrote that. And then send them that video and then try. So the more, if that congressman feels more and more tallies, it's not about arguing with him about correcting the errors of his ways. Don't worry about that. You're not going to do that. But the more tallies that go pro Ukraine, pro Ukraine, pro Ukraine, the more he's paying attention to it and thinking, you know what? I mean, I got to sign a deal somewhere because apparently within my district they're all about pro-Ukraine. So that's your best way of getting back toward that. Okay. El Kudo says, Professor Gerdes explained, sorry to clarify, General has published in CNN 2 days ago. The new article apparently went unnoticed. I didn't see it either. New article. So thanks for the heads up. I'll look at that. Are you going to vote for Trump as he's the candidate? No. And that's another commitment device. And I can't. So I tell you what, there's a potential caveat. If Trump sees the light from heaven and there's a revelation and all of a sudden he sees, support Ukraine, I will defend Ukraine to the last American, or not American, last Ukrainian with American bombs and weapons, there's a possibility, but I can't. I can't. I mean, right? So people are like, well, you're a reasonable moderate. I'm not a moderate. I'm full-throated conservative, but I'm like the old school conservative. Before Trump, like that kind of conservative. And so I actually appreciate some of the positions, but I can't stand his personality. And so I don't subscribe to the bombastic personality kind of thing. Like I don't want to see that. I don't want that as the example. But I actually appreciate some of the policy points, but I don't see any possibility at this point that that's going to happen, that I would vote for Trump in the general. However, I'm telling you that there is that sliver of possibility in that not likely to happen. And it doesn't really matter in the general what I do, because in the general, my state will vote Republican, just like somebody else's state will vote Democrat. So the real action in the United States is in the primary. Look, I mean, here's what's on my desk right now, right? Here's the date, February 24th, vote Haley, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's my hope, that I'll have a Republican to be able to vote for, and that's what we should all want. We should want a Republican and a Democrat that both support Ukraine, so that you can vote for whichever one you philosophically align in. And yeah, okay. I think part of the issue here is that foreign policy just doesn't rate as high as other issues with the American electorate, and it should, because this is a really important kind of thing. Okay. Cheryl says, I'm not MAGA, alt-right, or populist, what we call normal conservative Republican from before time. Okay, yeah, and I'm not. I don't classify. I mean, I like the slogan "Make America Great Again." I like it, but I don't. It's so loaded. I wouldn't call myself that, right? I mean, I want America to be strong. A strong America is good for the world, but make America great. Like, America first is not America only, and that's the difference. Like, sure, let's prioritize our interests first, but the rest of the world is part of something that we have to pay attention to. Yeah. So anyway, okay. Do I think that the USA will use EDA to directly provide surplus military equipment to Ukraine? If this is what we're talking about with the ring trade, I talked about the ring trade yesterday. So I'm very confident. Let's just talk about that. I'm very confident that Ukraine will have the material. It's taking way too long, and they have to be conservative right now in the way that they spend their shells and things, until like the rest of the world can kind of clue in. Honestly, in hindsight, we might. I'm not justifying anything the Republicans are doing to hold things up, but accidentally, kind of like Trump accidentally getting NATO kind of up to speed, we might look back at this November through February kind of time period as a really good time where Europe woke up and went, if America's not paying, we got to do something, guys. Let's get our heads screwed on correctly and support Ukraine full-throatedly, because they really were kind of waiting for someone else's lead in many regards. Now, that's not always true. Boris was the first on the ground in Kyiv, and then there were some, like Germany stepped up, Poland stepped up in different ways, but they really need to take greater ownership, and they are, and that's good. As far as the ring trade goes, the idea that Ecuador would sell its scrap surplus weapons to the US, and they'd get different stuff that is our scrap, and that's how they would fund it. That's what it looks like is going to be a stopgap. Some other kind of stopgap might be a lend lease kind of provision as a 11th hour provision to put something in that may or may not be used. I just don't know. But that's my thought about it. Um, but the ring trade is, uh, yeah, okay, not the ring trade, but directly. Yeah, I think you'll see more directly in little. Again, I'm still confident that they're going to make a deal. Like everybody else is, others are going. Oh, it'll never get through Mike Johnson. The House will do what the pressure tells them to do over time, over Trump's objections. The House will do what they need to do. And once you have a Senate deal, a real solid, a good from a Republican perspective, a good deal where they're getting sorted out with the border that they haven't gotten before. That Yeah, once they have that, it'll be hard to resist that if it's a good deal. And I think they've worked out that side of it. Okay, back to Ukraine, or at least Europe, or something along these lines to understand what's going on. Not UK. UK was out front. Yes, the UK was out front very early. Germany got a wake up call, and that's right, Cheryl, because Germany was really slow, but now they've picked up the pace, and they have been really good in recent months. All as slow as they were before, like, we're not going to give tanks unless the U.S. does, and again, here's another place. I know I just said let's stop talking about Trump, where Trump was actually right, but like it wasn't like he was trying to be helpful. But with Nord Stream 2, he was sounding the alarm like nobody else about Nord Stream, right? Like, you're dependent on Russian oil. This isn't going to be good for you. And sure enough, that's correct. Now, he wasn't doing it for the reasons you'd like him to do it, but he was right. Okay, let's see. U.S. does stuff behind the scenes that they don't want to put on. Well, maybe that could very well be. I think there's something to that idea that you don't want Ukraine to be fully dependent on U.S. stocks. That could warp their arms industry, but it's also a longer term problem too. So that is a long term problem. They thought that they had a shield of protection um, from when they did the nuclear deal, right? And so to not have a significant military, you can kind of go, we get it. We thought we had the Budapest Memorandum, but to the degree that they can amp up their own arms industry, and they are headlong, it'll be really good for Ukraine in the long run. They're going to be a prominent force in both the European Union and NATO after this war is over, and that's going to be healthy for their economy, and it's going to be good in the short term while they are able to take the fight into Russia, which they can't because we've restricted them with U.S. weapons. So again, the big story of the war is going to be that we were giving too little, too late, and restricting them, handicapping them. Here you can fight, but here's a baseball bat, but you have to hold your right arm behind your back and swing lefty. Like that's what we've done. Uh, in terms of Western support for Ukraine, will this diminish if the Iran situation significantly worsens? Can the West support two major conflicts long term? No. Our military is being reshaped right now to support one major conflict, and it's right now being. I know for a fact that generals are talking about reshaping for a potential conflict if China does what China might do. I'm absolutely certain, 100%. I have no question that that's what's happening. So they're thinking toward that end to what might be coming down that pike. Iran's a wild card, and that's going to be potentially problematic as well. Our military doctrine shifted from like fighting big land wars, like conventional wars against something like Russia, to like smaller conflicts all over the place that are, much more special forces kind of something. And it's like we've geared ourselves to be a car when we need to now be a boat. And converting from a car to a boat is going to be a process, and that's what they're doing. And this is one of the reasons they don't want to bog themselves down. I get that, but that's the military side, and that's not political as much as it is military thinking. The political thinking has little to do with it. It's just a matter of priorities, and she gets it, and Trump isn't thinking along those lines at all. So, okay. What else? Cheryl, that's true. I wrote to Biden so many times to do what Ben Hodges said. Seems he was in a cautionary bubble in his national security team. Yes, his national security team, his advisors are like. So when I was on Silicon Curtain, Jonathan was asking me about this, about his team and his advisors. Their reflexive reaction to things is, let's not provoke, let's not make it worse, let's not cause them to do something that might escalate. And I think that's fundamentally a wrong reaction. What they need is a John Bolton, which I know that'll make some of you cringe, but John Bolton is a conservative hawk that fell out with Trump. um, and his instincts for how to deal with autocrats are spot on, and autocrats only respond like autocrats, and there's something about that. Okay. Radek says, any idea why my government is so hesitant to deliver Taurus? Is there another political game? I don't claim to see. Okay, I claim to see Republicans pretty well. I am a Republican. I understand Republicans. I claim to see Democrats kind of well, but if there's a conflict between the way that I see Democrats and the way that Cheryl sees Democrats, Cheryl's probably right as a Democrat. Like, that seems fair. I don't claim to see I claim to see German and like British a little bit. uh, So Republicans, I'm there. Democrats, I'm mostly there. England, I'm kind of there. Canada, same kind of thing. Germans, I'm less. And the further you go on, more removed. And this only makes sense. Uh, Anybody who says, "I know this, I know that, I know the other thing, I know all about everything," I don't trust them. Like, if there's no humility about, and I'm not like being like, "Oh, see how humble I am." I'm just saying I don't know. And I learned this lesson from a Nobel Prize economist. It was James Buchanan. I saw him at UVA when I was in graduate school. I saw him give a lecture, and after the lecture, students would ask him these questions, and he'd be like, "Huh, I hadn't thought about that. I don't know." Another student, "Well, what do you think about this?" "I don't know. Uh, Something I'd have to study." And I thought, like, wait a minute, you got a Nobel Prize. Like, how do you not know? Well, but he knows what he's talking about with his Nobel Prize, but he's humble enough to recognize he doesn't know other things. And I think anybody that you watch, you should be looking for that as a marker of whether they really do understand things or not. So I'm going to give you that little piece of advice on top of, I don't know what's going on with Germans with a Taurus. If there's some other political game, I don't have enough information to be able to answer that. Okay. The big cat says, I'm a Democrat and I can understand Haley Republicans, but absolutely can't understand why anyone would support the orange monster. Okay. One, calling him the orange monster only inflames the other side. And I get why you do, but I would argue that just like go out of your way to be kind to the other side, it only helps. I understand you can do what you want. I'm just saying, and especially like one of Hillary's Clinton's biggest missteps was to talk about a basket of deplorables. That would be talking about people like me. That's all the people on the other side, the Republicans that are, pro-gun and pro-life, and all the other things that they are that she listed. There's a basket of deplorables. We just don't need. Let's talk about the issues that are there. But this is just my advice. You can do what you want. Okay, you understand Haley Republicans. Well, that's because the Republicans that had pre-existed Trump were different, and you understood those. So when I was talking to Jonathan again, there's old school Republicans and old school liberals. And on the left, there's also the woke want to deplatform the other side that's kind of toxic, like the Trump side. Now, some of you are in that camp, and I'm just saying there's kind of extremes that are kind of running off the rails. An old school Republican wants to argue with a old school liberal and vice versa. And I think they're wrong and they think I'm wrong, but we want to have the conversation. Let's work this out. Let's think about this. And it's interesting. And okay, maybe you can prove something wrong. Maybe not. But that's a different demeanor than the way that Trump is on one side and the other side is as a reaction. And you just don't get anywhere with those extreme reactions. And again, I think there's something to it about the that it's not his it's not the policy, although the policy has shifted because it's populist, as much as it is the attitude or the demeanor that they're gravitating to. I don't know if that helps. Okay, I'm sorry, I digressed here. Um, and please don't think I'm rebuking you. I'm just saying, like, it's the better part of wisdom is just to take a different tack. Man, things keep popping up. She is way underrated. What's the next one? It's the whole idea that if the whole government was against someone, they must be right. Yeah, yeah. Orange Kush said it's the whole idea that if the whole government's against someone, they must be right. Then the people want to support that person no matter what. Like they, there's a big faction within the Republican Party that thinks that with everything that the deep state the establishment is doing to Trump, they must be out to get him for a reason. Like there's like a conspiracy theory kind of mindset that's going on here as well. Trump is the establishment. Like you look at who has lined up behind him to support him. Nikki Haley was the ambassador to the UN, but she was an outsider in the sense that she's a governor from South Carolina. She's a former governor, and that like she's not part of what Congress was or the executive branch, except for that little stint as the ambassador. So she's actually more of an outsider. But Trump gets to play outsider while he's talking about tearing down the establishment when he was the establishment and all his backers are establishment. Okay, again, back off of Trump here. Let's talk about Ukraine. Um, okay, uh, I don't even know where I'm. What questions here? Given the seemingly devastating reports or Russian loss, I guess that is, it's surprising that Russia continues. No, it's not. Do you have any notion of what the Russian breaking point will be? Far, far from this. Their ability to sustain pain is pretty remarkable, and they're willing to do it. So they're militarily, they're nowhere near their breaking point. I think what Ukraine is doing right now, attacking all the oil depots and things to drain them of revenue is the right move because I I'm starting to agree. I've come to this for the last couple months slowly, just kind of ticking along, that the war won't end. The war has to be prosecuted in Ukraine, but it won't end on the battle. I'm okay. This isn't a prediction. This is just my gut feeling. I think the war will end when Russia has some kind of shakeup that causes it to end. I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm not talking about that Putin flies from a hotel balcony or something. I'm not saying necessarily that. Don't know what it is, but where something becomes acute enough in Russia that they can't continue to prosecute the war, because militarily they would prosecute the war. They would have another wave of mobilization or do it quietly and keep mobile. It keeps sending people into slaughter. Um, so they have to keep it up in Ukraine, but the way they really defeat Russia is to attack their supplies right now. If they could attack at the source of the oil, and really do some significant damage there, that would be really powerful. But what they're doing is a good step forward for them. But I I don't see any scenario where they're going, you know what, we're just militarily defeated, so we're just going to have to go. No, they're just going to keep sending more young people into the slaughter. That's my take. I could be wrong. I'm not. I don't claim to be a military expert, but from what I can see, from the mindset of the leaders involved, I don't see it. Okay. Is Russia holding back its newer weapons such as modern tanks and airplanes? Uh, I don't think they're really, I mean, other than nuclear, which they can't use because there'd be just be a pariah for the world. I mean, this would be the one thing that would unify essentially the world against them, would be to use nukes. And they can't do it. Like in the same way that, well, we had nukes, we couldn't use it in Afghanistan. It's the same kind of thing. But I don't think that they are. I think they're using, like, when you hear them talk on Russian state media, they're talking about like, well, if we really came out and fought, no, they're really coming out and fighting. And just because they call it a special military operation doesn't mean that they're not really trying to win in an earnest way. It's just, this is what they can do. Okay, the big cat. Russia's holding back fighter jets. Everything else is getting ground up. Well, okay, in a sense, holding back fighter jets in the sense that they're not crossing into space where they can get shot down easily. Yes, but I don't know that they're. I wouldn't say that they're not really trying. If that's what you mean. Okay. They're scared of losing. Yes, they are scared of losing fighter jets. Difficult to do, as most of it so far is beyond the range of Ukrainian weapons. However, I agree the internal issues would be a precursor to Russia being willing to stop. Yeah, and I everything that I've read tells me that, and I can't prove this either. Like, I just can tell you implicitly that which I understand is that it'll stop. It feels to me when there's some kind of acute event in Russia that's caused by that, and it wouldn't be done by sanctions alone. It's got to be like there's got to be this full court press. In the meantime, they're still, doing all their cyber warfare attacks. You saw stuff about Germany last week, 50,000 trolls in Germany, and so look for them to be contaminating various European governments as well as the U.S. elections, trying to monkey with things. Yeah. John Hoover says if they take Siberian oil fields and pipelines offline due to the lack of flow, it will really hurt Russia. Last time it was 1991. It took decades to bring them back with Western help. Right. And that's exactly right. Oil and gas are essentially a third of their budget. And because of that, if they can attack that, they can really make it very difficult to prosecute the war. But I don't see them leaving unless they really have to. And if you see them pack up and just like, okay, we're rolling out of Ukraine now, I would almost be willing to start betting on a Russian government collapse, because that would be like, look at what happened with Afghanistan and the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay. Let's see, where are we? Do you think that the U.S. inability to make decisions on Ukraine that is supported by the majority is worrying to allies such as Australia? Can the U.S. be relied on anymore? So all our allies recognize that we're a democracy, and democracies do what democracies do. But to turn your backs on NATO would be extraordinarily bad. Turning your back on Ukraine support is pretty bad. And I'm trying to remember where this was, what the video was, or the article was, but it was a documentary. Oh, it was a documentary about North Korea, and the North Koreans tried to assassinate the president of South Korea a number of years ago, and the South Koreans were like really angry and wanted to do something. But the commentator was talking about how the United States didn't want a war to kick up. Like, they were already in Vietnam. They didn't want a war to kick up with South Korea, and they have to keep their eye on what's going on locally there and what's going on in the rest of the world simultaneously. So while Ukrainians have to focus on Ukraine, America is focusing all over the world, trying to make sure things don't go wrong. And it's not that they're global police; they don't. There's nobody assigned them that job, but they're trying to keep, like, if it wasn't for the U.S. Navy, there would be a big secession of global trade for a large part. So if you withdraw American presence from other places in the world, a lot of bad things could happen. And as a consequence, the U.S. is necessarily diffused in the sense that they have to keep their eye on a lot of things simultaneously. But pulling out, to your point, of Ukraine makes it's just a really bad look in my estimation, and that's again, it's just the politics of what's going on right now. Um, okay, anyway, back to where we are. Do I think the U.S. should leave Iraq? Well, if they do, what happens to a U.S. vacuum if they don't have stability? Look what happened in Afghanistan. Would Iraq, which is now uh, which was always Shia dominated, but kind of the Shia stuff was tamped down because of Saddam and the Sunniness. Do you want Iraq becoming a bigger thing? And I, I'm not sure that that's a wise thing. I sometimes I feel like we have a cat by the tail and we can't really let him go. If we let him go, he scratches us, and if we hold him, he's kind of scratching us. So it's a tricky thing, and I don't have the all the answers to that. Um, I think the issue that we have, this is Ibrahim saying, I think the issue we have talked about US security and influence abroad as though it's some kind of charity. It's not. It's a lot of aid is influence investment. That's exactly right. The aid isn't charity. It's trying to keep the world flowing, and it's an investment in kind of tamping down problems while they're molehills before they become mountains. Um, okay. Smaller countries are flocking. This is America First Patriot. Smaller countries are flocking to the US, not running away. That's why Sweden and Finland joined NATO. They want the US nuclear umbrella. That's right. I remember, like, just a few days after Russia invaded Ukraine, watching the president, I think it was the president, it might have been a prime minister or something, of Finland, I think was president of Finland, coming to the White House. Like, this was on the news, him coming to see Biden, because they knew what was in the cards. If, like, the only reason that Ukraine wasn't, and we're almost to an hour, so I'm just going to do a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. The only reason why Ukraine was invaded here in 2022 is because they were not in NATO. Like, let that stick. If they were in NATO, they would not have been in danger. And so that's a real problem. Finland was not in NATO, Sweden was not in NATO, and they had resisted that for a long time. But they got the message when Putin invaded Ukraine that this is not a safe place to be. Okay. Cheryl says perhaps the USA should have kept bases in Afghanistan. Undoubtedly, servicemen and women would be dying there as in Iraq and in Syria. So again, it's a balancing game. I'm not exactly sure. I, I'm not sure how to play that. I don't claim to be sure, but we could tell that when they were leaving, the Taliban's going to do what the Taliban does. So, okay. And again, I'm not a globalist. I'm not calling for, the US should be involved in everyone, everywhere. And this is, by the way, the appeal of Trump, is that people that don't want that to happen, are more isolationists, are like, yeah, let's pull back out of this. Careful. Who do you want to fill that void? Do you want the Chinese to be the ones filling that void, or what do you want to have happen? So anyway, okay. Any other questions here before we're going to go? This was an interesting discussion. Um, I know we're all over the map, but yeah, it's there's a lot to it. By the way, just before we got onto this video, the uh, Ukrainians hit a Lukoil refinery in Volgorod, and you'll see something about that in just a little bit. That's the very next thing I'm going to do, is do a little video about that and put that out and see if there are any updates in this last hour or so since we started talking. All right. So thank you all for listening. There's 279 of you. If you could hit that like button before you leave, if you got any value out of this so that it can spread on YouTube, I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you for listening to me and interacting with me and adding context. Anybody know the name of the article? I'm going to look up the Zaluzhny article that came out 2 days ago, but anybody know that before we go? Because I want to track that down. I'm pretty sure I can find it. I don't remember where you said it was, if it was Economist or Time or what, but um, anyone going once? Anyway, I can find that on my own. That's not a problem. Thank you for your time, guys. CNN. It was a CNN article. Thank you very much. I'll look that up. All right. Thank you all. You all have a good day, and thank you for being the kind of people that care about Ukraine.